We'll get started. So thanks for coming today to HRG's Humanities Week Outreach Series on Research. It's presented by the HRG, the Office of Research and Innovation Services at the University of Windsor, and the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences at the University of Windsor. This is a week-long series engaging, translating, and disseminating research. And today's topic is one of the most important to academics, which is reaching people through academic books. And I'm so thrilled to have Leah Paulos here today. She runs one of the best PR firms, so says The Observer, in all the United States, Press Shop PR. She also runs the Book Publicity School, which is an excellent, intensive, and affordable series of lessons for people who want to learn how to really effectively promote their own work. I've taken this series of courses and it was absolutely excellent. So I really wanted to have Leah come and talk to all of you today. So thanks for coming, Leah.
Thank you so much for having me.
So she has worked with her work with Press Shop. I also want to mention the kind of coverage that she's been able to get includes coverage in the New York Times, the Today Show, the Daily Show, Colbert, NPR, SiriusXM, BBC, CBC in Canada, The New Yorker, CNN, et cetera, et cetera. So she really knows what she's doing. And when she works with people in the book publicity school, she really shares her knowledge. It's really intensive and she's not holding back when she's working in the publicity school. So before we get into the Q&A, and what we'll do today is I'll do a Q&A with Leah, and then after that, I'm going to turn it over to you. So even while we're talking, if you have questions, you can go to the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. You'll see a question mark. You can type a question into the Q&A, and then we'll get to it when we open it up to the audience. And also, if you'd like to come on the screen to ask a brief question, you can raise your hand. The raise hand button is right next to two over from the Q&A, and you can come on and ask a brief question if you'd like to do that as well. Before we get into the Q&A, Leah, could you just tell us a little bit more about what you do in your job and a little bit about how you got into it?
Absolutely. So the short version is we work with authors and publishers to line up as much media attention as possible around the launch of their books. So we do that in a number of different ways, in a number of different types of media. We work with, TV, radio, podcast, online, print, wherever we think we are going to be able to find people that are good target readers for the book. So that is really what the strategy, writ large is, finding where the potential readers for a book are getting their information. And then we try to place a story or an interview or a review in those different venues. So that's, sort of the big picture at Press Shop. Press Shop, I have been working, I founded it in 2011, 12. We've worked on over close to 350 books at this point. Prior to that, I was doing book publicity as well for a couple of years, but that was all word of mouth. But my entree into it was somewhat was different than most independent book publicists. Almost all the independent book publicists out there started out their careers in the publicity offices at a publisher. So that is, and as a result, they sort of came up in this era of doing publicity, usually in the 2000s, in the teens, and it's really changed so much since then. It's a very quickly evolving space.
Mhm.
It's really important to evolve. I think that's one thing that the publishing industry has not really done an amazing job at in the publicity sphere. But in terms of how I got into publicity to start, it was from I had a background in media. I was a writer and editor at various magazines. So that was fantastic training because pretty much all of the skills that I used as an editor are the ones I use today. It's
Mhm.
writing, it's coming up with stories that are going to be interesting to a particular reader, writing, shaping that story, um, working with publicists, so fielding ideas. So that, all of those skills, even the ones that I learned when I worked at a shopping magazine, Lucky Magazine, back when in its
Mhm.
heyday. I don't know if you guys had it in common. Yeah, you
Yeah,
did.
yeah.
Um, so that I always say was really some of the best training I had, because basically we were tasked with sort of creating a story out of a pair of shoes.
Mhm.
Like what we had to write 25 words about this pair of shoes, a long list of words we couldn't use, like chic and stylish. Um, and that was really the best training for figuring out how to tell a story, make it really legible and compelling in with an extreme economy of words. And
Mhm.
those are all things that I use in our work every single day.
And that can be so hard for academics who have spent, years and years working on something that's maybe between 80 and 120,000 words. And then they have to do this sort of haiku to tell the story of their book in like 15 words to try to get it out there, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is a really hard thing to do as the author. And you really have to figure out how to get outside of your writer head, um,
Hmm.
to condense, 100,000 words down to, 200 word pitch or
Hmm.
whatever it is.
And seeing how different audiences might be able to get something from your book as well.
Yes.
Yeah. So, okay. So pretty much anyone who's doing an academic book, they're working with an academic publisher. And those academic publishers have in-house publicity, of course. So I'm just wondering if authors, academic authors talk to you about that experience and why they might need to go beyond relying on the in-house publicity. And of course, different academic publishers have a different range of support, and they probably support different books in different ways. But have you heard feedback on how authors have felt about that experience?
Yeah. So, I mean, I would say that across the board, at any kind of publisher, even the big trades,
Hmm.
the publicity department, everyone in them is just really, really overworked. They're
Hmm.
understaffed. So when it comes to academic presses, it's even more extreme, unfortunately. A lot of times there'll be, depending on the press, sometimes it will be two people in the publicity department, sometimes it will be six, but no matter what, they are almost always juggling, a dozen books a season, sometimes 2 dozen books a
Hmm.
season. And they're just juggling an absolutely unmanageable amount of work. So, like you said, different publishers do have different resources. Like Princeton, for example, they actually have a really effective publicity department that is very responsive to authors. But then others are far less so. So, I think that just across the board now, the way media has evolved, where it's so fractured. There's so many different places to go. So many of the standard fare book review venues are no more.
Hmm.
Um, every publicity campaign to really properly promote a book, it takes a long time. It's not like 15 years ago when you could maybe put together a sort of 75-person list of people and all these book review editors and send it out, and you'd be at least confident some things would happen. Now you really can't do that because there just aren't as many book specific venues, and they're so overloaded with pitches.
Hmm.
So you really do have to dig in there and do this granular niche research and outreach. And for a publicist and an academic press where have so many books on their plate, they just don't have the time for that. It's time consuming. There's just no way around it.
Yeah, that's a way to think about it. If it's like if you might love all your children, but if you have 40, how are you
Yeah.
going to like promote one? You can't promote one over the other. And so thinking of where they're coming from will help you realize that you need to advocate for your own writing.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
And I think whenever I hear authors sort of complaining about their publicist, I'm like, well, let me just back up here
Hmm.
and explain where they're coming from. I can't,
Hmm.
obviously, I don't, not going to speak about any one person, but for the most
Hmm.
part, they, love doing this work and try to champion their books. It is just like you said, they have 40 children.
Hmm. Okay, so if we know that if we really want to get the most out of our work, and because I teach film and filmmaking films can be the same way where you work so hard on the finish line, like finishing your film, finishing your book. It's so much work, and then you sort of collapse at the finish line, and you're not really doing the best for all that work you put in. So I'm wondering if we think about in terms of when we are working on a book, there's sort of the idea and the research phase, there's the writing phase. We maybe have done a pitch in between. Uh, and then, of course, we're promoting. But when in that series of events should we first start thinking about publicity?
I always think it's best to start as early as possible to
Hmm.
at least just know that this is another piece of the work of being a writer. So, you might not be down, go down into these internet rabbit holes, finding different contacts a year and a half out, but start a spreadsheet, start keeping a place where you are keeping track of the all the ideas you have. You read an article and you think, oh, this, I bet this columnist would be interested in hearing about my book. You throw them on the list. So that kind of stuff is really helpful to do early way in advance. And then on the same tip, sort of thinking about how you're going to be talking about your book and making it accessible is something that you can also start to do, even when you are in the weeds of writing. At other times, maybe you're go to a dinner party and you're talking about your book, and you notice that whenever you tell this particular anecdote or you phrase it in this particular way, everybody's like, oh, that sounds amazing, I can't wait to read that. Make a mental note of that. Like this is a way into the book that seems to resonate with people. So I think that sort of general, just orienting your brain to know that there's this other track that's going to need to come into play down the road, and to start brainstorming, just make sure it's there while you're writing.
And so there's so many platforms for books. There's, social media, podcasts. If you're an academic, conferences. There's, book events. I think, whether it's your own book launch or being part of a book festival. What are the kinds of platforms? And, if we're going to try to focus our energy on what will bring the most rewards, like what are the kinds of platforms that academics should be really thinking about?
Right. So, I mean, it depends on the book and the author's platform and also their goals. So I would say all of the things that you discussed can be really valuable. Um, I think it depends on where you are and where your potential readers are congregating, what's going to be meaningful to them. Like awards can be fantastic, especially if it's something that you feel like, all right, this is a kind of crowded space, I need to somehow differentiate myself and show my credibility. Like that can be great to be like, I'm the blank award winning author of.
Hmm.
um, Festivals can be fantastic in that they have their own machinery of promotion. So you don't have to worry about getting people there. It's a group of people that are book lovers and interested in reading and learning. So those can be great. On the flip side, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of competition. So, with everything you do, you sort of just have to figure out for yourself what is going to be in your particular book where what's going to be the most impactful. So I know that's a little bit of a it depends answer, but there are a lot of it depends answers in publicity because
Hmm.
there are some pieces that are consistent across campaigns, across books. Um, I think you've probably heard me say this, Kim, that every single campaign, when I look across the 300 some books that we've done over the years, if I had to say what is true about all of them,
Hmm.
is that every single one has to have a really compelling pitch, press materials, a way of describing it in a way that is going to get people interested very, very quickly. And also show that it's in, that it pushes the narrative forward in whatever conversation you're a part of. So that's one thing, having those really compelling press materials is one piece that is true no matter where you are. What it's going to say is depends on all sorts of things, but getting that right is huge. And then on the other side, who are you going to send it to? Like that's the other thing. Your
Hmm.
media list, your contact list, that needs to be really targeted and custom to your book. And so, every author needs both of those things. You need to have the great materials, but then you also have to send the great materials to the right person. So I think a lot of answer to that question sort of, you know, goes back to sort of that, how are you going to populate your contact list? Is it with events and festivals? Is it more with media? Um, so that's, something we end up working with people a lot in the school on figuring that out for themselves, what the right mix is.
And what do you do if you don't really know what the awards are in your area or what kind of platforms? Do you have any ideas about how people can research that
Search.
aspect? Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, awards, there's a bunch of great, there's some online resources. Writer's Market, the book, has a huge list of awards that you can just page through. You can order that anywhere. Um, you can always, and this is true really for any type of research you want to start doing, whether it's awards or Substacks that might be interested, do some looking into where people that are writing in your space and on your topic, what awards have they gotten?
Mhm.
Uh, that you can figuring out some authors that have had books with some similarity to yours and doing a deep dive into all of the launch activities is a really valuable thing for every author to do. And that can include, oh, they also, clearly submitted for these 3 awards.
Mhm. And so you mentioned Substack. Could you talk a little bit about social media? Because I think especially for academics, if you're doing like long-term academic projects, then that the amount of time that you really need to put in to develop a social media or a Substack or all of those kinds of things can be really daunting. Some people might not want to expose themselves in that way. So what do you say to academics about how, like their ideal social media presence and also other ways to approach it if you're a little more shy?
Right. Okay. Well, that's a big topic. So,
Hmm.
um, I think you don't want to, nobody should completely discount social media, even if you despise it, um,
Hmm.
just because it's how everyone gets information now. So,
Hmm.
artificially cutting yourself off from it is not helpful. That being said, you have to be strategic about it and you have to be realistic about it. Nobody gets a ton out of social media. It's not going to be the cure-all to all of your book promotion woes to just open an account on whatever
Hmm.
platform. In order to get a lot out of social media, you have to put a lot into it.
Hmm.
The authors that we've worked with over the years that have used social media in an unbelievable way, sold tons and tons of books. Books went into multiple printings they love social media and they spend hours a day doing it.
Mhm.
And it doesn't happen otherwise. So, you do need to sort of be mindful of that. So, but that doesn't mean that if you're not gonna put all your eggs in the social media basket, if you don't want to spend hours a day doing it, that you shouldn't do anything. So what I would say about what everybody should do is, so again, with all publicity, it goes back to where are your readers? So, if you are an academic with a really serious niche topic, probably TikTok is not going to be the right venue for you.
Mhm.
If it's something that has some sort of maybe like business or leadership element to it, maybe LinkedIn is a good fit. Um, so you want to figure out where your readers and where your community is when you're thinking about which platform to use. Um, you know, I will say that, I mean, Twitter for the longest time was fantastic for book promotion and academic authors.
Mhm.
Um, it's we shall see what will happen with it.
Mhm.
A lot of people in that space have moved over to Blue Sky recently. So what I think is I always talk to authors about the importance of having a website
Mhm.
because for all sorts of different reasons, it is one place that you own it. You can tell your story the way you want to tell your story about your work, about your books, um, and nobody, it's not dependent on anyone. Elon Musk can't buy your website. I guess he probably
Mhm.
could, but he's not going to. So if you have a website that really presents your work and the ideas of your book in a really compelling way. Again, that sort of goes back to the messaging piece around the press kit. Um, that can help with this weird moment we're in with social media because even if you aren't very active on social media platforms, you can still have an account in your profile. You link to your website and maybe have some sort of nominal presence where at least if you're on a radio show and they want to announce your interview, they can tag you and then people can see your website and go to your website. So your website sort of gives an anchor that you can have on different social media accounts, which I think in this time where social media is also very fragmented and really quickly evolving is one way to combat that. And then the other thing I would also just say quickly is you authors really want to think holistically about their platform these days. So eh, you want to think about all the different places where you might be able to promote your book. So have an email contact list of your friends, family, colleagues, former, coworkers, your MFA colleagues, whoever it is. Um, and then maybe you have a Facebook page back from 2009. You don't really go on it that much, but there's still 400 people there. All right,
Mhm.
maybe like dust that off and at least announce your book and maybe make some more connections there. So, you just want to think about getting in speaking to a lot of different potential groups, and making sure they know about your book. And that's sort of another element of this holistic outreach to all sorts of all areas of your potential communities.
So for people that maybe don't have a website, can you speak a little bit about what might be, have you counseled people on sort of really user-friendly ways to build websites? I'm assuming just like with everything else in terms of figuring out what you want to look like, you should look at other comparators, other authors, and look at it, find out who has websites, see what you like. But then once it comes to making it, if you're not very tech savvy, do you have any suggestions about how to go about it?
Yeah. So, I mean, something like Squarespace is just very user friendly. I mean, there is a learning curve, but it's not terrible. And you don't need to hire a first class designer to make a nice looking Squarespace. If you get the messaging and you sort of get the outline, and then you go either to one of the Squarespace, they have like a number of people they refer to, or if you just
Mhm.
go on something like Fiverr or Upwork, one of those sites, and get a Squarespace developer, you can get someone for that's fairly inexpensive to just execute on your plan. Um, I think what authors need to start is, I mean, it can be pretty basic. You want to, if this is your first book, you don't have a ton of media or a ton of stuff to put on, then even if it's just to start having like a homepage with your book, the publisher, the date, always people forget that all the time. There's
Hmm.
little details. Um, but you and then you want to message in a way that makes it really clear to people, like what are you offering? Who are you? What are you sharing here? Like you have to constantly when you're putting your website together, constantly be thinking, no, looking at it from the eyes of someone who has no idea who you are, and explaining who you are and why your work is interesting. Um, I think you also just want to put your best foot forward. I think I see authors do this so much, like they'll have maybe their first book, they got like a rave in Kirkus and the Washington Post. And then they put up their new book and it's just like blah blah blah. This is what it's about. And it's like
Mm.
the Washington Post and Kirkus said like amazing things about your other book. Don't make it seem like they're saying it about this book, but by all means,
Hmm.
make it clear to the website visitor that you're really well reviewed, and the Washington Post said you're a fantastically insightful person about blah blah blah. So just really putting the presenting yourself as positive a light and your work in a really compelling way. Again, you can pull from whatever pitch materials you're putting together. Um, but that's sort of what I would say about websites.
Yeah, I mean, you're trying
I
to get
could
the
talk
most,
about that forever, but
yeah, you're trying to get the most valuable thing from people, which is their time. And so, yeah, if you're holding back on the
Mhm.
best arguments about why your work is worth their time, then yeah, then you're doing everyone a disservice. So
Yeah.
yeah, you shouldn't be shy or feeling like that you don't want to brag or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. Like people should not have to click on three links or go dig down and scroll down to find out the best stuff about your work. Like they should get it
Yeah.
within the first 3 seconds.
Right, right. And then for the professors that are in the audience, if a lot of us have access to students, and if you have any funding, I find okay, I work in film, and so we have Jade, who's the RA, and helping us with this session, and the film students are fantastic. It's pretty incredible that the skills they have. You ask them to create something in any kind of sort of graphic design program, and it's done. So I think that sort of this generation has those skills. And if you're working in a department or those skills aren't necessarily there, they're at your university. So just sort of ask around because making a website is definitely something that either you can do yourself or you can find somebody to help you with that. Now, do you put the press kit? You mentioned the press kits. Do you put that on your website?
So Ken, I mean, usually I we want to take the messaging that you've created and put it in that format rather than um, an official like media kit. I'm not opposed to that, but I think in general, what you're putting together for your pitch is often, also what's great for your website. Maybe your pitch is
Hmm.
a little bit different than the catalog copy for a book because the catalog copy it's written so that it's not easily dated. It should be a
Hmm.
little bit evergreen, whereas a pitch is like, no, right now this is what it's
Hmm.
doing. But the great thing about your website is you can update it as you go. So you have the most compelling pitch materials, way of presenting your book on the website. And then, in 6 months, if it feels like, all right, maybe that particular little moment passed, let's tweak these first couple sentences to account for that. That's easy. And Squarespace makes it so easy to do yourself, even if you are, if you hire, a student or anyone to do it, to actually create it, doing the little tweaks is so easy. Anyone can show you that in 15 minutes.
That's such a good point. So often we're working on things where we're trying to add to a knowledge that might be going back hundreds of years, and it's our contribution, and we might be thinking these long periods of time. But then in terms of pitching, that's really important. What you said is like, why is it important right now? And once you figure that out, and I think probably everyone can find something, how it's relevant. I mean, there's a reason you were interested in it. So how it's relevant to the present in some way, and that you're putting that forward in all your press materials. If you're reaching out to do an op-ed or to podcast, that's at the forefront of why you're telling them to include you or to speak to you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the one way to think of that is when you're reaching out to a journalist, whatever type of journalist it is, if it's a producer or a Substacker or anyone who you want to get to cover your book, they have no interest in covering your book. They have interest in covering, doing a story or doing an interview that is going to interest their readers and their listeners. And you just have to find a way to shove your book in there, so why, that's, you always want to think like, what is this story I'm giving them? It's not that I wrote a book, it's this book sheds light on blank blank that we are all experiencing today. So that's just a little pivot when you think about how to interest a journalist. Think about what a journalist needs. They need a great story. They need it to be timely. They need it to not come out of left field. They need it to be very easily understandable. So you need to give them, the easier you make it for a journalist to cover your book, the better, because they're also really busy and slammed. And if you can figure out a way that makes it very easy for them to envision covering it or envision an interview with you that's going to be really interesting, you're more likely to get covered.
Yeah, and that's a useful exercise, like stepping outside of your interest and thinking about how somebody outside of your discipline or outside of academia. And I guess if that's hard for you, just talk to your friends, like talk to other people and help them shake loose what is really going to grab people.
Definitely. I mean,
Yeah.
that's really good exercises. If there's somebody that knows a lot about your book from just talking over the years, yeah, see how they describe it. Because one thing that happens with authors when they try to start writing those pitch materials and messaging is you've been living with this book for so long. You have sort of well-worn, pathways
Mhm.
for how you're going to describe it, and you need to kind of just get out of it. And so having another person describe it back to you can be really useful for that.
So I'm wondering if you could share with us, like over the years, some of the most ingenious or novel or interesting or successful ways that authors have gone about getting attention for their books.
Yeah, so let's think. I mean, I think one thing that you always want to do especially if you are an academic author with some expertise, but people aren't going to exactly cover that. You have to think about making yourself into an expert on a particular topic. It doesn't work for every author, of course, but we've seen academic authors. I mean, we worked with an author who wrote a book about the rise in bottled water use and how it correlated with the trust in government. Like people who didn't
Mm,
trust government use more bottled water. So it was, kind of in the weeds academic book, interesting.
yeah.
Um, but it wasn't like a kind of book that everyone was like, mainstream news outlets weren't like, oh, we must cover this topic. And then there was the water crisis in completely blanking on which city it was in now, but it was in the Midwest.
In
And
Flint, I think
yeah, no,
just
but it
close to
wasn't.
here.
It
No,
wasn't. It was
no.
another one. Oh, Jeff.
Okay.
Anyway, it wasn't Flint. It was after
It
after
happens.
Flint.
Yeah.
Yes, it happens.
Yeah.
So then he put together talking points that were just specifically about this issue. So, and it broke onto the news here in the US on cable news. And that's a time where they don't have, they have a million people to go on and talk about politics or, this element of foreign policy or whatever. They don't have a million, public water supply experts on hand. So we were able to get him to put talking points together about this specific issue. He, still highlighted his research. The Chiron said, gave his name and the name of his book. He was able to mention it in an answer. But what he offered is what the journalist needed. The journalist needed somebody to speak intelligently about this water crisis. So that's one thing you can sort of keep in mind is, just making yourself useful for journalists. You always just want to think like a journalist. So in this case, all right, we're thinking that this is a huge story. They have their reporter on the ground, but they don't have anyone with any expertise. And we were able to get him on MSNBC for that, which, was a small academic book from a small academic press. So that's one example. I would say the other things are, when you, Kim, have heard me talk about the importance of doing a Q&A. For every author, for all the books that we work with at Press Shop, we always do a Q&A with the author that we include as part of our press packet. And that is a really fantastic way to give a little bit more information about the book, because again, that pitch needs to be really short. Give people more hooks, more ways into the book. And really importantly, it gives them a sense of what an interview with you could look like. So, a journalist, again, a producer, when you're pitching your book to a producer, say there's this podcast you heard, it's like perfect for your book. You reach out to this producer with, okay, this is a really compelling synthesis of my story, why it fits into the conversation. But still, the producer's job is, okay, is this person going to be a good interview? Are people going to find this interview interesting? So you give them a Q&A that takes that guesswork out of it. You just gave them a Q&A that, first of all, does a lot of the work for them. In terms of, a producer's job is to get familiar with the book and write really interesting questions, for the host. And also be confident that the answers are going to be interesting. And so you sort of knocked all of those things, like check, check, check. So that's, been another one where we've been able to, producers have told us that they were able to book it. They sometimes take those questions and use them themselves.
Right.
But that's been another one where we've been able to get academic authors on really big, prestigious, media hits.
So sort of combining those two examples. So in the situation where this crisis cropped up and it intersected with the book, then you've got this press. I assume you sent maybe the Q&A and the press kit to media outlets to get media coverage.
So I think for that you kind of can send an email saying, hey, in light of this thing that happened, I wanted to, let you know about this author, the author of this. He has wide experience in, public water crises and worked on Flint. He can speak to the following ideas, or here are some talking points that he couldn't make in an interview. And then like bam, 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 like 2, 3, 4 of them that are fairly short, but not obvious, not something that anybody can say, something that kind of pushes the narrative forward, that author has the insights, their experience, it's grounded in their experience and their scholarship. And then you can say something like, I'll include more information about the book and the author, as well as a sample Q&A beneath my signature. And that way, the short part is, this is what the journalist needs. They need this information. This person's available for interview. They have this book from this publisher, which is a credential. They're not like a crank. These are the points they're going to make that are going to be really interesting, and they can make them on the air. Great. And then the rest of it down below if they want more.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about emails. So that's really great, because thinking about it in terms of, like, we all know what it's like when we open up an email and it's like a block of text. It's really overwhelming and your brain might panic a bit, and we don't want to make people who we want to interest in our work panic.
Mm,
So that's really smart that it's sort of digestible, straight to the point, and then it's sort of inviting people to read on if they like, and then so they could become interested and not read further, and then you've accomplished your goal.
mhm.
Also, do you have any other recommendations about like the tone if you're going to like cold call, like reach out to a journalist, try to pitch an op-ed, try to pitch yourself to a podcast? Some tips about doing that and also about following up, if you could talk about that.
Yeah. So you want to keep in mind, I mean, exactly like you said, you don't want to hit them with a wall of text. You want to be pretty straightforward to the point. Cut out the pleasantries. You don't need to hope they're well. Just understood. You probably hope they're well. Go right into, um, what it is, who you are, and what it is that you are offering. So if that offering is, this really interesting insight and or take on this topic, make that clear up front. Below, when you can include as much below, I mean, not as much, you don't want to put 30,000 words, but you can
Mhm,
have 1,000 words or something beneath your signature, as long as it's really formatted really well. So it's like about the author, all caps, bold, underline, advanced praise, all caps, bold, underline,
mhm,
so that you can very easily skim through it and get the information you're looking for.
mhm,
um, so, that's one piece. You want to think about, the journalist, and so they need the story. They need to know that it's current, or if it's not current, like they need to know when the book came out, the
mhm,
title of the book, who published it. People forget that all the time, and there are so many self-published books there
mhm,
that you just right away don't make the producer or editor wonder for a second if it's self-published. Tell them, no, it's not. It's published by
mhm,
the University of blank. Um, so those are some elements you might want to say if it's for an interview. You might want to let them know if you've done some other interviews or if you feel comfortable, because the other thing that a producer needs to know is, okay, this is a really interesting topic. Our listeners are going to be interested. Thank you so much for this Q&A. This helps me prepare. Is this person going to be able to talk well on air? So, it's not everybody can. You don't need to be you know, professionally media trained, and, this isn't a high stakes presidential debate or anything, but you need to be able to share your points in a way that is, sounds good on audio. So that's one piece, like a media trained, or like, hey, I spoke on this, CBC show. Here's the link if you'd like to take a listen, because that is something that a producer needs to make sure.
mhm,
Um, so let's think, and then following up. So following up is huge. Do not follow up. You
mhm,
must. When people tell me, "Hey, yeah, I wrote to them and I just never heard back." I'm like, well,
mhm,
did you follow up? No. It's like it doesn't even count as not hearing back until you at least
mhm.
follow up once.
Yeah.
I cannot tell you at Press Shop, if we didn't follow up, we'd probably get like 15% of what we actually end up getting,
Mhm,
because everyone's busy. So people miss emails, they think they're going to go back to them. So always follow up. You can just say, maybe after a week, you say something like, hey, just wanted to follow up on this, or just bumping this to the top of your inbox, or, in light of this new, FDA report today, I wanted to follow up and see if you're blah, blah, blah. Um, so that's a really important thing to do always. I think it's every publicist. I mean, in a lot of ways, we are professional nudgers, but I know it's harder to do it when it's about yourself. But it is just, you just gotta kind of push yourself and press send again.
And I guess make sure that the tone is like very upbeat and
Yeah.
in no way sort of frustrated that you didn't get
Yeah, no, don't be like, I can't believe
yeah.
you didn't respond to my first email. I'm giving you another chance.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Are there any things that authors sometimes do that either don't get a lot, it's not necessarily worth the effort, or I'm wondering if there's things that could potentially bring negativity that might be not be worth the effort. I'm just, is there anything that comes to mind in that way?
I mean, I think two things that authors I think should be careful of because they can be really take a lot of time and energy and don't always have as much payoff as you'd like are social media, which we already discussed.
Hmm.
Which again doesn't mean to completely eschew it. It just means be mindful, be strategic. Um,
Hmm.
and then also in-person events, they can be fantastic when when there's an audience, when there's a group that's promoting it. It can be really hard if it's just you. You basically just need to make sure that there are going to be a lot of people at every event, and you cannot count on a venue, a bookstore in particular, to bring people in. People don't go to events for that usually. There's some exemptions, in here in the States at Politics and Prose is in a bookstore in DC that has a
Hmm.
hugely robust event series, and there are a lot of people that just go to a lot of events there. But most bookstores, you really have to think about it as almost like a party that you're throwing for your book, and don't throw a party if you don't have people to attend. So that's one mistake I see authors making. That is another reason why it's so great to do events with sort of co-hosted by an organization or like a museum or some other entity that's going to pull in their own people. Um, but I do think events can be one of those things that you want to be careful of because they take a lot of time. You have to travel, you have to go, you have to be upbeat and ready to talk. And then if there aren't a lot of people, it's a giant bummer. So that is one thing to be careful of.
Yeah, because I think you have to guard your, you don't want to be sort of beaten down by the process, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's really not fun to go to a bookstore and have like three people show up. Like that's just a big buzzkill for everybody.
So when you mentioned working with people with built-in audiences, it's probably worthwhile wherever you live, kind of trying to figure out what kind of groups have a platform that you could maybe pitch yourself to them where they have events and kind of knowing what kind of draw they have and so what you potentially could bring in for an audience and also to do things sometimes with the sense that there might not be a massive crowd but you're going to put your work out there and that's probably a smart thing to do to just get out of the archive, get out of the classroom and try to get more of a sense of what's happening in your city where you live.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah. So do you have any recommendations for other avenues or resources or research that authors can do as they're trying to figure out how they're going to get their book out there?
Yeah. Op-eds are always one way to do it. It's good for getting your name out there and just sort of raising your public profile. How much they impact book sales is potentially, it's hard to say because if they have the book in the little bio at the bottom, it's not super prominent, but that's definitely a great way to share your ideas. It's also something that can sometimes draw other media. Like people will see this op-ed and then you can either point to it in your pitch. So then you can go take that and go over to this radio station and say, hey, you may have seen this, op-ed I just wrote in the Boston Globe, blah, blah, blah. So that's one thing to definitely consider. Um, and I think the other thing is really just to know that you want to think about reaching, it should generally be, it's not they're not unidimensional anymore. You know, a campaign shouldn't just be made of one thing. It should be a email to your a broad swath of your friends, family, colleagues, etc. That's maybe like a pre-pub email. Then maybe you do one more if you feel comfortable with tour dates. There's the social media piece and dusting off each and every old platform you have, maybe figuring out some new ones, doing the Substacks, doing the op-eds. You don't, obviously, nobody can do everything and you don't need to do everything. But I do think that in this environment, people have different ways of getting their information. And some people are just like have an earbud in their ear and they listen to every podcast and that's where they get all their information. So just make sure you're on a podcast or two. Um, Same goes for Substack. A lot of people just read all sorts of Substacks. So just, you want to don't rely on any one avenue for promotion in this environment where everybody is just sort of all over the place and getting their information and accessible in many different ways, even if they're not the same ones that were available 10 years ago, for example.
And it's interesting with academic work that I think that one thing maybe academics can do, because we also are reviewing each other's work.
Mhm.
So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are if authors try to build a network more either in real life at conferences and by actually trying to set some kind of goal, like I'm going to write a book review of somebody else's book once every X years, so that you're not just wanting people to read your books, but that you're kind of contributing to the ecosystem. I'm imagining that that would actually have positive benefits because you'd get on the radar of other people as a reviewer, and that it would kind of generate positive feelings that could benefit you and your readership in the future.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I think that's a really, really important thing to keep in mind. You can also think about if there are other books that are in your space coming out either before or after yours. You can think about reaching out to the author and saying, hey, I'd be happy to moderate
Mhm.
a talk with you, or I'd rather be happy to, do some sort of, pitch each other, pitch the two of us as a joint event. That's one way to get more people at an event is if you can pool audiences. So definitely supporting other people in your space is good, just because it's good, but also it definitely does help in this entire publicity space of getting attention for your book and raising your profile and just getting you more name recognition.
Mhm. All right, so I'm going to turn things over now to Q&A. So we have one already.
Okay.
So a question says, thanks very much for these great ideas. I have a scholarly book manuscript that's almost complete, so good to be thinking about this now, and an agreement to publish it in an open access basis with an academic press. I'd love to attract a general audience as well as academics. Does the marketing strategy change if it's open access and it's freely available online? The book includes 2 chapters on India that I'd love to find, and I'd love to find some readers over there.
Hmm. So, I mean, in terms of targeting general audience versus a more academic audience, I mean, that usually ends up just being a shift in your language, although how you present it, although usually if you're presenting your work in a way that's accessible to a sort of general audience, usually the people that are going to be interested in your field are going to be interested anyway. You don't necessarily need to, it really depends on who you're writing to. But I think in terms of those two audiences, it could be a question of tweaking your pitch, or maybe the one that's just your more mainstream one will work. How does open source affect it? I think with people, again, need the story. So if you can point to why this is so interesting and what this shares about what's going on, all of the things that we talked about, I don't think it matters that much. It's the story and whether or not it's in a book that is being put out by Random House or Yale University Press, or open source is less important in this environment. Um, I think that might impact some review places where they could potentially have some guidelines on which ones they publish, what they publish. But I think for people like Substackers or podcasts, again, where it's not necessarily, it doesn't have this long journalistic tradition where, okay, yes, this needs to be published between this and this month in order for us to cover it. These are people that are creating spaces for conversation, and they just care less about that. They care more about the conversation and the narrative, I would say.
And I
So,
get with open source too, I mean, the great thing there is you're going to have an opportunity to have a lot more impact, to have a lot more citations, and to get into a lot more people's, especially if you want to get to the general audience as well. That could be really useful to up those citations.
yes, definitely. And
Yeah.
if there was a third part of that question that I forgot.
Well, just that I mean, he's open to the general audience as well as academics. So, and you mentioned that that's sort of refining. I would say a lot of times that an academic pitch would need to be translated from that language a bit, right? For a general
Which,
audience.
yes, I definitely think the academic pitch needs to be translated to the general. It's just sometimes the general pitch that you put together will work for the academic audiences as well.
And I bet sometimes not too, because a lot of times there's like a bit of you don't want it to sound too general for an academic audience because they want to
Yeah,
have a sense that it's going to dig into some complex ideas and jargon can kind of
right.
signal that in a way,
Yeah,
right?
I think it just depends on what the actual pitch ends up looking like and who you're reaching out to and what other materials you're sending. Um, so that's just sort of something on a case by case basis to figure out.
And if authors were to do one thing only, if they were to just focus on just a one easy target to promote their book, what would you suggest is the number one thing of all the things that we've discussed?
Yeah. So maybe I would, instead of one thing, I would say one exercise that you can do that will lead you to the thing, which is figuring out a book or two or three that is similar, like we talked about before, the comparable titles,
Mhm.
and so that it's similar in that if somebody covered this book or somebody invited this author to talk, there's a decent chance that that indicates that they would also be interested in your book. So finding some of those and then just kind of mapping out, like open up a spreadsheet and map out what happened with that book. Like where did it get covered? Which shows did they go on? Did it get reviewed? Did they do any awards? What does their website look like? Just really look at the holistic picture of what it is that that book launch looked like. Um, because then you can see, I'm like, all right, this actually would make a lot of sense for me. And I saw this book all over the place, and I really thought, oh, this book really got out. I'd love to emulate the success of that campaign.
Mhm.
Okay, like this is how you do it. Um, so that's a really good exercise to do. And a lot of times that will then point you, first of all, to specific journalists or outlets, but it will also just give you a sense of what is working in your space. And then it takes it out of the abstract. I mean, one thing I hear so much from authors is, I mean, a couple of things. One is just like I'm a writer or an academic. I'm not a marketer or a publicist. I don't even know where to start. And then the other thing is like there's so much information out there about book promotion that it's just hard to figure out what's worth doing and what applies to you and what to ignore and what's bad advice. So, this kind of exercise takes it out of the abstract, out of this overwhelming space, and it's just like, all right, like let's see what happened to this book, and let me try and make some of that happen for my book.
Yeah, and I think it's really important probably for people to have a plan before they're totally done on what they're going to do with publicity, write it down, like put check boxes and try to make it like you're not going to submit your book without finishing the last chapter. So try to make that doing the publicity part as integral as that it's not an add-on, it's not an extra, it's actually a part of what you're doing with the book.
Yeah, definitely.
Because I think it's too easy just to skip it because it's daunting and it's a very different muscle. It's a very
Mhm.
different world than what people are doing when they're writing their books. Like, you're teaching, you're doing research, you're writing, and then you have to also kind of be put on this business hat, and it's a lot to juggle. And so I guess that's kind of a good segue to, if people want more resources and they'd like to know a little bit more about Book Publicity School, could you tell them a little bit more about that, and if they wanted to sort of learn in a more detailed way about how to publicize their books?
Yeah. Yeah. So Book Publicity School is where we basically take all of the tools and strategies and insights and just all of it, everything that we have learned and that we do every day at Press Shop, doing these campaigns. There are five of us, so it's five of us every day working at this intersection of media and publishing. And then it offers it to authors in the form of workshops, online workshops. So the idea is that publishers require authors, especially academic publishers, really need authors to do a lot of work. Um, and then, all the things we discussed, it's daunting, it's hard to tell what to do. They're also, media and publishing are both kind of opaque spaces. They're kind of can be a little intimidating. They're people who aren't in them don't exactly know how they work. So it's really then hard to be effective when you don't really know how either one of these two spaces that you're navigating is working. So we try to just share as much insight into that as possible so that authors can promote their book really well and effectively. So we have a whole bunch of programs. We have three tiers. We have a monthly 101, which is free. And then we have three different tiers of paid workshops. So one of them is the crash courses. Those are one-offs. They're 90 minutes, and we just do a deep dive into one topic. So we have one that's just all about how to craft your messaging, how to position your book, how to get those materials written and really tight and fresh. So that's one of them. The other one is that other sort of similar pillar. And, when I was saying that there's sort of two pillars to every single campaign, the other one is how to create your contact list. So how do you find which shows you should target, which journalists you should target? So we share a lot of research techniques. Then we do another one on author platform that talks a lot about websites, social media, awards, reviews, or reviewing other people's work. A lot of the stuff we spoke about today is we go into more in depth in that one. And then the fourth one is about post-publication promotion. So, before publication, it's a sprint. You want to get a lot done. You ideally want a lot of media and attention to hit around publication.
Mhm.
But then the book is out in the world and it's just beginning its life. So
Mhm.
at that point, you have to pivot a little bit on some of your strategies, but there's still a lot of opportunity now in this media world. There's a lot of negatives that you can speak to about the media and information environment today for sure. But there are some good things, which is there are a lot of post-publication opportunities now. So that's those are our four crash courses. And then we have a 6-week intensive, which Kim, you spoke about. That is six sessions where we cover all four of those topics in the crash course, plus op-eds, excerpts, placing other types of writing. We talk about timeline, working with your in-house publisher, getting blurbs. It's a lot of info. It's intensive. It's appropriately named. And then we also work with authors on coaching on a 6-month basis. So sometimes they want to work with us on a longer term basis. So the 6-month is really where we work one-on-one. all of those courses that I just mentioned are involved, but then we also do one-on-one sessions with me, one-on-one sessions with my team, a resource library, and just ongoing support and Q&A and just sort of professional guidance. We hear that from authors a lot that like, I don't know who to ask. You can who is sort of in the know about what this means for my publisher and what should I say and what is this timeline, etc. So that all of that is part of our 6 month program. And yeah, it's really fun.
Yeah, and I think you've given a lot of input about how they basically have to become detectives or researchers, and you can find out a lot by looking at comparison authors or books and what they have out there. And then if you do the book publicity school, then you'll get some more detailed and one-on-one feedback too. So you're not creating your pitch by yourself. You'll get feedback on those kinds of things. So if you want to go up that level and get more, professional feedback on what you're doing, then it's a really great option.
Yes, we do that in the 6 week, which I should have mentioned.
Hmm. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And we'll email all of Leah's contacts out to everybody at the end of the session. So thanks so much for joining us. And thanks to everybody who attended.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been fun.
Thank you. And I love the I Hate the Internet book that you have behind your head for
A
these
very
internet
funny
sessions.
book.
Yeah, we can all relate, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Excellent. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.